Thanks very much indeed. And first things first, the government motion, and not just the motion, but since the very start of this crisis on the 7th of October and the response from the Israeli government and military, the Irish government has been absolutely clear and adamant and first up in the European context in calling for a ceasefire and an end to hostilities. And the wording of the motion couldn't be clearer that our priority, absolute priority, overwhelming priority must be to advocate for an immediate stop to the death and destruction in Gaza and take relevant actions to that end. We've been consistent in that from the very start, and not just consistent in response to what's happened in Gaza the last 100 days, but I would argue the Irish government, the Irish state, consistent for decades in terms of standing up to the rights for the Palestinian people for a whole variety of historical reasons. So let's not depict that as something to divide, an oppositional government divide. I don't see it as such, because what we are seeing is absolutely horrific. And I've cited, I was speaking last week, the World Food Programme evidence in terms of, the figures change, but hundreds of thousands of people at risk of immediate starvation. That's why this is unprecedented, requires urgency, is incredible in the scale, not to mention the bombing of hospitals or universities, our families, our journalists, the list goes on. So we absolutely accept and understand that, and that's why we're giving government time here today, because this is an issue for government, for the opposition, for every party in this House, and for the Irish people, and for countries and people right around the world. I want to thank my whip, Mark O'Cahasey, for his specific proposal that we would put the motion to government time. I think that's appropriate. I regret, Deputy Batchik, we couldn't get the wording, but we had to get it through government in the absence of it being agreed by government. It was very hard to share that. But it's very important we do get agreement. Part of the tradition, Deputy Boyd Barrett, in my mind, and why our Irish government and Irish people want us to take a strong line on this, is historically as a state we have stood for UN human rights, the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights. And that's not exclusive. That also applies to Hamas, or what happened on the 7th of October. You cannot not ignore the death and loss of life and the nature of what happened on that day. But also you cannot ignore that the disproportionate response from Israel is a clear case that has to be heard by the International Court of Justice, and we will respond to that in the way that we do to all such human rights issues, through proper legal international process, because following that approach, your voice is listened to and you are heard. And government has been this government, and this Taoiseach, I'd have to say, in the Department of Foreign Affairs, firstly, the Department of Foreign Affairs have real expertise in this issue, in this area, in how we speak in international United Nations and other fora. So we listen and heed to their advice, because they're really good at this in terms of how do you get the legal structure right. And legal process here is important. This is not an insignificant issue or an unimportant legal issue. And we've shown in the past absolute willingness to take a legal position. In regard to Russia's accusation of Ukraine of genocide, supporting Ukraine in the response to that. Was it 5 months after the original accusation? Because that was the right way to legally argue that, counter-argue the Russian accusation of genocide. And similarly in regard to the UN process, where they've taken cases to the International Court of Justice, we're one of the few European countries that has actually stood up and willing to back the Palestinian case. In written format, and next month, the 22nd of February, our Attorney General will stand up for half an hour to represent the injustices that have been occurring in Palestine for decades, as well as the last 100 days. And also, I remember in time of government, we responded to a number of weeks ago, what can we do here? The best, most important thing we were asked to do, that we've delivered straight away, is resource the courts. So the depiction of this is, oh, you're not willing to stand up in the courts, the exact opposite. And my understanding is we will wait the provisional outcomes, but what the South African case is looking for in their initial application is in every instance what we've already said that we want to deliver, that we agree. So let's use our voice in the international fora where it can be strongest. Let's pull the European Union, which we've been doing, towards a position that's closer to what the one the Irish position holds, which is not where Europe started. And let's use that not just in relation to the case in South Africa, but in relation to the issue about recognition, about what's happening in the West Bank, not just in Gaza, in terms of sanctions against some of the atrocities, the ongoing atrocities that are taking place. And that's the approach that the government is taking and is set out in this motion to give our public reassurance. Absolutely, we can see what's happening and we want to try and impact on it. We do that best in the way we've always done in the United Nations, to the right process, the legal mechanisms, and be strong in our voice and be clear, which we are and will be. That this injustice has to end today, and that we will stand up for the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights for all citizens in the world. A small nation as we are, when we get that voice right and when we apply it to the legal structures and institutions that are in place, that's when we can be most effective to protect those poor people in Gaza suffering the bombardment and starvation that they are today. Thank you.